Yeah, cool. So I think it's just the three of us for now, but of course we could just give another 2 or 3 minutes for people to stroll in. This session is recorded, but we don't. I mean, we don't have to post it after. If not,
I'm flexible.
yeah, sounds good. Sounds good.
I just jumped from another call, so forgive me. I will mute myself because I will be eating, and I have another call at 1 p.m.
No worries. No worries.
It's another of those Friday, which looks like Monday.
Ooh, that's never good.
Well, hopefully your upcoming Monday will look like Friday then.
Seems it's been always Monday.
Always Monday. Yeah, well, before you drop, you have any questions or anything you want to mention to Keith or myself, so we make sure we cover it.
I'm excited to hear um, Key's experience, and I'm here to learn. And yeah, if I have any question, yeah, I'll unmute myself and ask. But thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, me too. If I want to do an introduction, even though no introduction is needed, but so Keith and I, we went back, coworkers at Microsoft, and that was probably where we kind of left off on the kind of the career kind of discussion, right? Like, I mean, I talked to him on other areas, but I'm being interested in hearing, kind of what your thoughts on career development, on what helped you the most, and go from there. So, what were your kind of in a 5,000 feet summary of kind of your career path so far, Keith?
Um, things for me started in probably 97, 98. And there I was actually building up computers myself. Someone had showed me how to do them. And a manager said, hey, if you can do that, you should come to the IT department. Did that job. It was pretty dirty. It was setting up new networks, computers, phones, and running Cat 5 at a convenience stores all around the country. It was not very pleasant. You had to get in the ceiling to run cables. It was rough. It was rough.
Yeah, yeah.
So I decided that wasn't for me. The next job was a consulting role, doing web development, as a matter of fact, with PHP and ASP pages. That ran until 9/11, and 9/11 reset my expectations and sent me home. And then I had a chance meeting with a friend of a friend who recruited for short-term contracts, just doing PC refreshes and things like that. I kept doing that until from 2002 until probably 2005, 2006. And at that point, someone pulled me aside and said, hey, when we need help on this network gear, you seem very adept to that environment. You should really look into it because most people can't follow these instructions and kind of understand what's going on. I didn't know what he was talking about. I just kind of did what they needed me to do, usually bringing up an interface that was keeping them from connecting or something like that. But when I looked into it, the mystery of how complex things were just pulled me in. And so I started working on my CCNA at the suggestion of another friend who was already doing networking for Singular, if you remember Singular,
I
before
do.
AT&T. Yeah, before AT&T bought them, he was
Yeah.
at Singular, and he suggested the CCNA. And during the time I was kind of working help desk and deployments, I would look at the CCNA material. But even after I got my CCNA, no one wanted to see me cross over. So what you've done tends to be what people want you to continue to do.
Mhm.
And when you look at something new, people are like, you don't have that experience. You have some adjacent experience, but you don't have that experience. And so it was real challenging to get a full-time network position. So I had to make some compromises. And my compromises were extreme. The same friend had gone to the Department of Defense and was deployed in Iraq, working on networks there. he gave me all the contacts, all the pointers, all the support to also take a Department of Defense contract. So 2007, I deployed to Iraq for my first CCNA job and was introduced to the environment by my manager at the time saying, hey, stop asking questions. I'm trying to sleep. And he was serious.
So was it as a contractor or was it as a military, like military
You,
proper?
you support the military, but you are contracted to the DoD.
Yeah.
So it's, full, I think it was, our contract was either 60 or 72 hours a week. That's kind of how they framed the contracts. And so here we were supporting different connections that were not heavily used, and
Right.
we only kind of had to bring them up if needed. So most of the time you're kind of on standby. So since it was so much downtime, and I felt kind of obligated to my family to not just earn the money, I started studying for my CCNP. And the reason that became such a perfect fit is because they had gear that was laying around. So rather than just do a lot of theory and kind of think how things work, I actually got to plug up devices, load firmware, see what works, see what doesn't. And it was only a 1-year contract. So 2008, I was back home, took a position at a company I used to do help desk for, level 3, but now I went doing IP activations. So that ran until 2010, where I felt like I kind of capped out on what I could learn. And just so happened, my buddy was still deployed, and he was like, hey, they're looking for somebody to manage this team. And so I went back to Iraq, excuse me, in 2010 as a country manager. And here we had about 7, 8 locations, 3 guys each location. But here I still have my own location to manage, but we were more involved than before. There was not sleep time, so to speak,
Oh,
and you
wow.
really got to feel like you were part of the mission, for the good and the bad. That again was a 1-year contract. 2011, I came home and decided to relocate because at the time I was living in Oklahoma. Oklahoma doesn't have a lot of opportunity for the advanced networking. And so I took a small jump down to Texas where you had a lot more interesting positions to get. So 2011, I took a job with a company that ExxonMobil had just purchased and wanted one of the network upgraded. Really, it was more like a testing ground for what they were thinking about doing with their global network. So they were running VRF Lite across frame relay links and things like that. So it was really interesting from that standpoint. And that ran for about 3 years until 2014. And that's where Microsoft called. And what was funny about when Microsoft called, I swear I thought it was a joke. I thought it was, and I
Why?
mean, because I just never got a call from a company like that. And I had no idea why they were calling. And the lady was really nice. And she was just like, we want to talk to you about this position. This manager thinks you should be part of the team. And I was just like, listen, I'm in the middle of something, wrapping up a contract, should be done in a couple of weeks. Why don't you call me in about, a couple of weeks and we can talk? Thinking if it was spam or some other kind of
They
scheme.
wouldn't follow up. Yeah.
That's right. That's what I was banking on.
Yeah.
14 days to the day she called. And I sat in my seat slowly. I'm like, this is probably for real. Sure enough. A few months later, I guess maybe a few weeks later, they flew me out after I passed the phone screen. And a few months later, I was in Redmond, Washington, working for Microsoft and could not believe it. Could not believe it. But the decision for Microsoft for me was about testing myself to see if I could do the job, to see if I could live up to that level of a global network of that size, doing whatever they needed me to do. It's kind of a test to see if I'm smart enough. I remember thinking like, if this works out, I'll have great experience. If this works out, I'll have a great name on my resume. And if this works out, then this will be a change for my career. And it has. I'm still in Seattle or in the area now, 10 years later. I have continuously worked not directly for Microsoft, but with Microsoft for the last 10 years in different capacities. and it was career changing. It really was.
Yeah, I think maybe I don't know if people are aware in outside regions or people who never been to Seattle or Redmond, right? Like Microsoft is really a like Redmond is really a Microsoft town, if you will, right? Like I
Yeah.
mean, there's some gaming company, Nintendo's here, but
Mhm.
really Microsoft made this town. So you would like go streets and streets without ever getting out of Microsoft's
Yeah.
campus.
Yeah.
And it's not just the direct employee. I forgot what they said. Like I don't know, was it like 60K or something employees in the Redmond region? But
I don't
also,
know
it's
the
like
number. It's
yeah,
huge.
it's like vendors and
Yeah.
like people who drive the shuttles and
Yep.
food vendors or catering companies or just real estate company. So like I mean I think the Microsoft economy is much bigger than just the employees. So just echoing what you said also that when I first step on foot as a young engineer on I still remember it was I think it was building G, Studio G or
Right.
Studio F
Right.
or whatever. Yeah, this was like the Xbox, like the cool
Yes.
building
Right.
when they first move it over. And I'm like, oh my God, everybody walks really fast and they're like, they look all smart and carrying laptops that are just like top notch. And I thought like if I was able to make it, and I feel like try to measure up, right? Like if this
Yeah.
was the one of the big tech companies and like a hiring bar, then I could make it anywhere. But anyways, Keith, it's funny to hear your story on so far that kind of parallels to what my own experience was.
Mhm. I think they kind of know that kind of mindset of someone who wants the challenge, wants to see it not only if they can do the job, but can they be productive and contribute at that level. And it's a great place for that. I know from the day I went to orientation, there's an energy in the space of knowing that you are among some of the best and brightest in the world, and no matter what they do versus what you do, you guys are in the same room. I feel that energy today when I walk into some of those buildings, like I think it's building 92 or
Yeah.
where the store is and the security and everything. So I really enjoy that. I really do.
Yeah, and I think also kind of interesting is Microsoft actually has multiple personalities
Hmm.
that different group had different personality. Like
Yes.
Windows certainly feels different than Office 365, feels different than Azure, feels different than Xbox. And so when you walk in those buildings, that atmosphere takes on the personality of that group.
Agreed.
So it's yeah, not I guess what I'm trying to get at is not every group is Azure. not
Yeah.
not every group is Xbox. So what you describe is how like people say different facets of an elephant. So it's
Mhm.
one side of Microsoft that was certainly progressive, certainly inviting and exciting.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I guess yeah, from that time, I went to Microsoft. I stayed for a few years.
Yeah.
Went to Juniper. Oh, Bearcat, you have a question?
I was asking, are you still at Microsoft, or I thought you are at Juniper, right?
Well, let's finish the story. Uh,
he's at the 20 what 13ish. So let's
no,
bring
2014 is
oh 2014.
Microsoft start.
Okay, so let's
2017 is Microsoft stop,
yes,
and
yes,
that's
yes.
where I went to Juniper.
Right.
I worked Juniper. I worked at Juniper actually up until the 1st of April 2024. I just left Juniper this month, and I now work at Nokia. So I spent 7 years supporting Microsoft for Juniper. I was everything from a test engineer to an automation engineer, and then a resident consultant, and then a SE, and now I am a solutions architect at Nokia,
Yeah,
still
so
supporting Microsoft.
if I were to bridge back from what you talked about until what when Bearcat asked that question, is you actually left Microsoft proper, but
Correct.
you work for a vendor, i.e. Juniper, that they have permanently uh, resident engineer or a systems engineer, like they have a group that's supporting them, and they don't go into like the Juniper office in
Correct.
Sunnyvale. They actually residing in Seattle supporting Microsoft because it's such a big account.
Correct. Absolutely correct.
Okay, got it.
And that
Okay.
brings us up to today. Today, I'm still in training, trying to get my access switched from Juniper to Nokia to go back on site and work with the teams that I'll support. I'm making sure that I answer any questions that I know for my company when they ask. But I'm prepping for certification to get more familiar with Nokia's OS. It looks really interesting, and the environments are very similar to Juniper so far.
Dude, I think from what I could see from your like LinkedIn posts and all that, your shall we say fourth gear in studying have kicked in after you switch to Nokia. It's like you're getting certification every other day, man. So
Oh,
what
I
are
was
some
doing
of
it
the
on my way out.
Oh, okay. Well, either way, right? Like you're getting certification. So I think I want to get back to kind of you know during this whole time, what do you think the biggest or maybe the top three attributions are for your self development, right? Like you talked about maybe your mindset on if I could measure up, if I could like up my game to these other people, or like if not limiting yourself for opportunities, like several deployments and taking the opportunities to learn and so on. So I want to kind of drill down on those things like characteristic traits for self-development. What do you think are the most important or the top three most important attributes for self-development?
Recognizing that there's more to self-development than technical expertise. To understand that you interact with devices and you interact with people, and both of those things need training and nourishment, and you have to kind of stay on top of those things. And that it's also a good idea to work on yourself even when you think everything's going fine. That's something that I didn't do it on purpose. I won't try to make myself sound like I was some kind of genius, but I enjoyed reading these kind of books like John Maxwell and these self-motivation books that forced me to look at things a different way, in a more positive way. And I realized that helped my interactions with other people, because I could kind of share some of that perspective with those people when I interacted with them. So over time, I realized that some of the jobs I was getting and some of the moves that I would have to make inside these positions was related to how well I handled people. And so I started to understand that was a benefit to me. And I made sure that I spent some time making to stay on top of those skills, to always remind myself of different perspectives, and to never treat it like just because I may have had a natural ability, I still invest some time and effort into people skills. So I think for me personally, that has been one of the most beneficial things, is that you can have a conversation with me about anything I'm knowledgeable about and not feel technically overwhelmed. And it's been complimented in several interviews, including Juniper. When I went to the Exxon company, they had something to say about how I handled the people. And a funny story about the Exxon company, which was called XTO, is there was a rather abrasive young man on the team who rubbed 80% of the people the wrong way. And we had to divide these teams up into, two-man teams and split up the country and look at the upgrade that we would need to do as far as configs and how they would change and things like that. And when they picked these teams, they assigned me this rather abrasive young man. And I pulled the manager aside. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? What did I do to you? What did I do to you to make me take this guy? And he said, Keith, you handle people the best. So we have the best chance of success if he's with you than with anyone else. And then I understood that being good with people has a cost associated with it, and I was about to pay it. And sure enough, I crossed paths with him after we left, and it was a horrible experience, just like I would expect. It was impressively bad. So there's a cost, but I get it. I get it.
Well, I think the cost, it was more like uh cost in terms of your energy, but it's a
sure.
positive
I
value add for
Sure.
careers, right? That's what you were
Agreed.
saying. Yeah, that's what you meant.
Agreed. So soft skills are number one. Number two is being just infinitely curious. And that just comes down to asking questions like the hot thing right now is AI. Well, I want to know how I can use it. So I bought a GPU to play with it at home. I want to know more about different tweaks or prompt engineering and things of that nature to make it a tool that I can use day to day. But I'm always like that. I think one of the certifications that you may have saw was a Azure data certification. I did that because my daughter's a data scientist and I want to know more about the job she does. I want to understand more about how technology feeds into what she's doing, or maybe even what she's not doing, that we can sit down and have a conversation about. Data engineering to me is just like another form of DevOps. So I kind of look at that like that's complex and interesting. And, I just want to know more about it. And the third thing I think that has contributed to my success is a willingness to invest in myself and in my curiosities. I used to set aside like 5% of my annual salary, and that's free for me to spend on anything that can teach me something. So
Mm-hmm.
that combination of soft skills, curiosity, and investment are a really good combination for me.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And I also want to say hi to Benjamin, and feel free to unmute and ask any questions for Keith. I mean, I didn't mean for it to turn into like a podcast interview, but that's how it turned out to be. But good to see you again, sir.
Hello.
How are you, Ben?
Doing well.
And by the way, this session is recorded, but maybe I'll just ask for other people's opinion at the end whether we want to post it or not. But I do think like Keith has some good things to share, and he talked about like the theme for this coffee hour really is to like the attributes for self-development, and using Keith's experience as an example. So he talked about previously when he was doing a contracting job for DoD, and like the various connections that he made along the way, working for Microsoft, the mindset that he had coming in, why did he want to work, and so on. So, and that's where we left off, and like the 3 habits or the 3 top traits where we think that that contributed to his self-development. So I wonder if you have any thoughts, whether Benjamin or Bearcat, on like for Keith.
Yeah, I have few questions. Thank you, Keith, for lining the attributes that helped you, like the people skill, being infinitely curious, and willingness to invest on yourself. 5% is a large amount. I'm going to maybe I'll ask like what service, like what resources you have, but my question is more or like on managing your time. Like we are all, I think, being in technology, being in networking, there are lots of shiny things around us. Like you mentioned, data engineering, now AI. So how do you manage your time for like for developing yourself? And since you are now in transition, my follow-up question is: when you move from one company to another, and I guess you are moving like after 10 years. So on this new company in Nokia, like how do you integrate? Like what's your attack plan? Like I did ask the same question to Eric a few months ago, and he said he has like 1 month, 3 months goals. So how do you normally integrate when you move from one company to another?
Well, I'm actually going to start with your follow-up. because that one's real top of mind. And I cheat, to be honest. I've cheated because when I left Microsoft to go to Juniper, I was already working with the Juniper team weekly. I knew these guys very well. They knew me very well. So it was a very easy transition to go from working at Microsoft with the Juniper team to working with the Juniper team with Microsoft people who I had also worked with. So I feel like half of the challenge, or maybe even 70% of the challenge in transition, I cheated. I already knew the Microsoft network from working there. So when I go to Juniper, I don't have to learn the Microsoft network. I already knew the people, didn't have to learn the people, and so forth. I almost did.
I wouldn't call it cheating, Keith. I would call it resourceful.
Okay, I can go with resourceful. And I've done pretty much, well, it feels very similar in my transition after 7 years with Juniper, now going to Nokia. I still know the Microsoft network. I still know the Microsoft people. So only people I have to learn are the Nokia resources, but things feel very similar as far as the structure and processes. Some things you just don't learn any other way except the experience. So I'll have to see some things go from point A to completion with Nokia to understand the process and just ask a lot of questions along the way. So I think that answers the second question. I would love to have a 3, 6, or 9 month plan, or even a 1 year plan, but I'm kind of looking at this like I'm going to let my customer, meaning my manager is one customer. I'm going to let him tell me what he needs because I'm the first. I'm the first solutions architect on the Microsoft account. What he needs from me will be different than what he needs for the next person. So he will drive that after we finish up some training. I am kind of training Nokia on how to let us have access to the buildings, to the people, and I'm taking them through that process. So that would be more fluid. So I'm not worried about it just because I completely understand what they're trying to do, and I'm here to support them because they have a technology that I'm curious about. So I'm going to get my itch scratched for curiosity while I help them develop a better relationship with the customer. So that part I'm real confident in, but I really wish that I did have a clear 30, 60, and not even a 1 year plan. Now, as far as time management, I suck clearly at time management. And I've heard of people like Eric, you mentioned the Pomodoro technique. I'm aware of that, never use it, but I know what it is. I should try it. The things I really do in my day is I know in the early part of the day, I'm going to be studying for my certification. Then I'll basically look at different breakpoints in the course material to say, hey, once that section's done, I know I'm going to go work on looking at some configurations on Container Lab, since that's very prominent here at Nokia. After I choke on Container Lab and hit whatever I can't figure out, I talk to my onboarding partner and ask the questions about what I ran into. He'll bring me information or sometimes questions to help me find my way. And then the rest of the day, I'm usually looking at internal resources to find the tools that I'll need for later, things that I know come up. I go look for those resources right now. And that's most of my days, unless I do get lucky enough to get pulled into a meeting. I'm kind of trying to learn. Notice what I'm doing here. I'm trying to learn the personalities, learn how they interact to kind of get a understanding of how I fit in the environment. And then I'm also, of course, trying to understand what the meeting's about. Technically, is it something I have input on or not? And that's really my approach. Does that answer your questions?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I don't use Pomodoro technique tool, but I know what it does.
Sure.
I plan to have like 10 hours of study time every week.
That's good.
But I'm always like, and I record every week, like how many hours I studied and which subjects or which field. But the best I reach is mostly like 7 hours, 6 hours, and it's Uh,
Are you using any of the techniques for remembering space repetition or anything like that?
no, so I have. In fact, I'm preparing now to recertify my CCNP.
Mm-hmm.
So I do repetition by revising the topic with different provider. Like if I read about one topic in the book, then I will watch maybe a video about it. So that kind of repetitive, not. I don't repeat the same thing on the book again. The problem is I don't have time. Like I want to take the exam on certain date, and yeah.
I get that. The fact you're tracking it is a really good sign. Anything that's tracked can get better. And I like the fact that you're engaging the same material different ways. That's something I try to do as well. On the material that I'm looking at for my certifications, I'll read about it. Then I will actually try to go set it up in Container Lab. Then I have a conversation with my onboarding partner. And if I can find a video, which are kind of scarce, so that may be an opportunity, I'll watch the video. So I think those multiple modalities of engagement will really help.
That's good. Yeah. Benjamin, if you have question, yeah, go on. I'll ask after you then.
All right. What type of conferences do you prefer? Do you prefer a vendor conference or something that's more career oriented?
I think I have to give us a third option. I like the conferences that are vendor independent but career oriented. Like the Network Automation Conference in Denver last year, I really enjoyed that conference because you're in a room of like-minded people, and part of the reason I like that is you again are introduced to different perspectives. Everyone at that conference said blame the vendor. And because I worked at a networking vendor, I assumed that it was networking vendors that they meant, but they did not. They meant the vendors that are providing the automation. So I had to learn that. And I mean, I went more than half of the conference thinking, oh, wow, they're blaming Juniper. Oh, wow, they're blaming Cisco. And it's our fault. I need to figure out what we're doing wrong. And they were like, no, not necessarily the networking vendor, the automation vendor. So I like those conferences. I like Nanogs whenever I go because of the people you get to run into. I did get to go to Charlotte's Nanog this year. And when it's in Seattle, I try to always go. I like those conferences more than the vendor specific conferences because you know the vendor's going to be there to rah their own product, right, or their own environment. And I like the other perspectives. I can get rah from the vendor anytime, right?
Even when John Alway is performing. No, yeah. I think this year is Cisco Live is John Alway.
Is it?
Yeah. What did I get a name
John.
right? Oh, I'm sorry, Elton John. I'm sorry. John Alway is the GM for Denver Broncos.
Oh, got you.
I was watching the draft last night, if you guys could tell. But anyways, yeah, Elton John. There you go. Even when Elton John's performing, Keith prefers.
What are some of the network automation conferences?
The only network automation conference I've been to was the Network Automation Forum conference last year. I know right now they're doing conferences in Europe somewhere, but I think they're gonna have something back in the US next year, I think. But that's the only one I've been to. You do when you go, and this is another reason that's a benefit to go. You hear about where some of these guys, other conferences they go to, and there was either a Kubernetes, I think it was a Kubernetes conference or KubeCon that came up, and then the DevOps conference, which may have been DevOps Days, was something else that these guys talked about while they were there, because they're very heavily automated spaces. So I would go to one of those for sure, especially KubeCon, because it may be related to what I do at work. I would consider that one.
Yeah, I think it was the net DevOps days,
Net
and
dev
then
update. Yeah,
they start consolidating some of these,
right. I didn't
especially
get that.
for especially for I mean, they spend the same amount, right? So they might as well, maybe sponsor and then make that amount bigger so that people get more out of it when they're there. Um, yeah, the only vendor neutral ones that I'm aware of is the AutoCon, and I just recorded a episode, or 3 episodes actually, with Scott Robon. So it's gonna air on kind of his own career path, and like his reasoning for starting or co-founding the conference, and what's the path forward for that. So it's probably gonna air in June for network automation nerds.
That'll be great. I did get to meet Scott in Denver and again in Charlotte, and he reminded me that our paths had crossed
At
before.
Juniper.
Well, actually, he had left Juniper but was working for DriveNets, I think, and we
Mm.
had talked while he was at DriveNets, where we had lost an account manager to DriveNets, so it was nice to kind of run into him, and I even talked to him after I got to Nokia. So Scott's a great guy.
And Eric, if I remember correctly, next month's coffee hour is about AutoCon 1, right?
Yeah. So I think there's a member who's going to be at AutoCon 1 in Europe, because I think many of us are US based, and we may not make that trip, but he will. So yeah, so he's thanks for bringing that up. It will be a treat to hear somebody else's experience. And Network to Co, in fact, actually has about 4 or 5 people, because we're big on US and Europe. So we actually have I want to say presentation. So Jason Edelman, for sure, he's going to talk about like the new Nautobot book. And then we have a few coworkers who's going to be there. So maybe I'll bring them on too, if I could, just kind of have a panel discussion on different perspectives. But yeah, definitely the next coffee hour, it will be on AutoCon 1. While he's fresh in his mind, I think.
I really do hope it changes or it helps, move automation down the road. I know one of the challenges that I've went over with someone was that a lot of the old guard, old network engineers who are not as automation friendly sit in very influential positions. And I think that kind of slows things down because they know what they know very well and they don't necessarily know automation or how it can intertwine with what they already know. So they kind of push back on it. I just think that I hope that the conferences can help move things along.
Keith, I had a quick question on what you
Sure.
talked about during AutoCon 1 or AutoCon 0, on what they blame the vendor, but it's the automation vendor. So I don't know, like, maybe without naming any names, right? But like, what are some of the things that they talked about that was specific? Because I always blame the hardware vendors. So,
Well, don't get me wrong. There was a lot of passion around the lack of full openness with some of the hardware vendors.
sure.
But I think what it boiled down to was the complaints were you could do what the vendor thought you needed to do and not necessarily just whatever you wanted to do. And so what ends up happening is a vendor, of course, tries to set up things for the masses and the 80%. And I really felt like a lot of these guys felt a certain kind of way about that last 20%, or they didn't like the approach that a vendor took. So if you look at it like maybe someone didn't allow you to go onto the device and just do anything you wanted, like you might do with a straight, for me, NetMiko connection. They didn't like that approach. I
Mm.
don't. It took me so long to realize it wasn't just hardware vendors that I remember having to shake that off. Like, oh, that's not us. Oh, wait, we're okay. That I don't remember going back to really investigate that because that wasn't my space. Where when you're talking about a hardware vendor, that was at the time, so I didn't investigate it deeply, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, but it's also a little bit I think it's also a little bit biased toward the crowd at AutoCon, right? So the
Sure.
people you talk to probably was already knee deep into automation. They probably have years and years of experience, and they're more or less opinionated about the way they want to do things. And the vendors, like you said, like, I will use the term we because now I'm part of that ecosystem. Like we have to, made for the masses. Like we have to, take care of the people who may not have years and years of experience and just starting out, as well as having to accommodate the tools that we're using. Like for example, if you know as well as I do that Netbox and Notabot both built on Django. So the Django framework is opinionated about the database that you use. So yeah, it's great that I wish I could use Dolt too, but hey, SQL it is.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
yeah, so I think it's a little bit of both, but I hear you loud and clear. It's like I want an open playground as well and make the right choice, but don't stop you from making alternative choices if you want.
Yep. It's a great. I still think it's a great place for the network to grow. I feel like things could be very different in the next few years as the network is kind of consumed by other automation like other devices of the network. Some people don't want to see that, but I absolutely think that's the way forward. I do.
Yeah, I agree. But yeah, we'll see, right? Like we'll see. I think there's a lot of opportunities, especially with AI. Now that everybody wants an AI story. I mean, you mentioned container labs, which I think will play a big role in whether you're having a digital twin or whether you're just like labbing and learning and all of that. So, look forward to it. It's really exciting times.
I agree. I agree. I know. Back to the career discussion. I watch a few of the subreddits that talk about different career questions, maybe specific to networking or IT in general. And a theme that I see is, and I think is real, is I think it's the exact wrong approach. Is you'll see people say, "Hey, what job should I go get? I want to make $100,000." And I think that's backwards because you're the one who's going to have to do that job, right? Anybody on the internet can tell you anything, but you have to do that job. So to me, you should kind of get ideas, but don't try to get your path from somebody else. Get ideas, research those ideas on LinkedIn and YouTube, a day in the life of whatever the position is helpful, and then see if those things spark your curiosity. And I'll always come back to the curiosity because that makes the job feel like more of a natural fit. If you're already curious about it, then as you learn, you're like scratching the itch of curiosity, and that takes away some of the toil of just doing a job. And chasing money will never be the ideal path. If money's not the last thing on your priority list, you're doing something wrong, to be honest. And those people who are just looking for that, I think it's amazing that no one really jumps in and say, why don't you come back and figure out how to ask the question of how do I be a network engineer, or how do I get into sales, or how do I get into Kubernetes or something like that. That's more specific rather than trying to blindly follow, whatever these guys tell you because there's a dollar amount associated with it.
Yep, that makes sense.
I mean, I hear you, Keith, but I would push back a little bit, just a tiny bit on that. I think you need to make a decent amount to begin with, right? So
No,
it's
but how
like,
do you do that? How do you start
yeah,
off making the decent amount?
yeah, you can. But what I'm saying is, you have to hit like I don't know what that number is, right? So if the U.S. census was correct that your the incremental happiness that the money brings you is smaller and smaller, like
Oh, sure.
diminishing returns once
Yep.
you hit 70k, let's just say 75k,
Yeah.
right? So you need to hit 75k, whatever that number is to begin with. Then you could start talking about like self-realization and so on, but you do need to have
Oh, you're
basic amount.
saying you're saying it's okay to chase money in the beginning and then reassess later.
Yeah, I'm saying, have a livable wage first, right? Because I remember when I first started out, I was making 26K, and there's various reasons to that, but I didn't think 26K was survivable. So I would need to bring myself up to whatever that amount that's comfortable is. Then I could start talking about, okay, I don't need to optimize for salary. I could, take a little bit of K for more freedom, the more learning opportunity. So that's the only bit I will push back on. But I agree with 90% of what you're saying.
Sure. Yeah. I think we're saying almost the same thing. We're just saying it like timing wise. Like you're saying starting from zero, it's okay to chase some money. I mean, livable wage. And then you can make the assessment because you have the livable wage and it's not as critical at that point. Sounds like. That's
Yeah.
fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
So it's like, I think it's up to your priority and your optimization. So you like the priority of salary kind of goes lower and lower as you progress through your
Sure.
career, but it's unfair for people who's been working in like me, right? Like I've been in it 20 years, and if my salary is still 26K, there's something wrong with it.
Right.
So it's
Right.
unfair for me to say you shouldn't prioritize salary only because like from my vantage point. So yeah, just taking, I like I said, I agree with mostly what you said, and totally think that we shouldn't prioritize money always.
Yeah, if I understood it correctly, Keith, I see those Reddit questions too, and I always say like, I do say the same thing. Like that should not be the first question because it has to do with their approach to life as well. Like I know that if I have worked like in some other sectors, I could have got more, but at the same time, I don't like it.
Right.
And that work with something on that you have passion on shows when you are thrown in an issue that requires like several hours of unpaid time, but you have to research on it, and you have to spend your weekends, you have to share it with your family. But Erica, I hear you too. Like I have two kids, and I want them to, when they are still young, but when they reach like college time, I want them to focus on like disciplines that will earn them decent life.
Yeah, it just reminds me of was it Latrell Sprewell, who's like making, I don't know, 12 million, and he's like, oh, I got a family to feed.
Yeah, like, how can I get by with this? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. But anyways, that's not what we're talking about, right? We're not talking about making between 12 mil and 14 mil. We're talking about a livable wage and just career growth and how you optimize your time. But anyways, I don't want to dwell on this subject any longer. I think we all talking about the same thing. We're just kind of beating out the same horse there.
Sure.
Keith, one last question. So you mentioned earlier your third point was you invest on yourself, like up to 5%, and you are part of this community. And I see, it's kind of personal question, but I have started this journey to network automation a while ago, but I have not made lots of progress. And what do you suggest me? Like which communities? How did you reach here? Like books, and I try to I'm glad that I was introduced to the book club here, and I was able to read, like, I think chapter after chapter 9, and it gives me a good perspective. But and at the same time, with the little time I have, I kind of sometimes feel like I scattered all over the place, and then I only grab few things, not into depth.
I have a very, very simple suggestion for you on the automation. You said you were recertifying your CCNP, right?
Yeah, and I did have the Cisco CCNA DevNet
Okay.
in 2020. I do some few Python scripts here and there, but
Do you
yeah.
do any labbing? Like, do you have a virtual lab or anything set up to lab with your CCNP studies?
I did have, but so I'm now doing security.
Okay.
So not routing and switching, but yeah, I did had GNS3 EVNG. So
I would get the lab back online to use
okay,
for your security studies as you learn something configuration wise for the certification. Go learn how to do the same thing in Python, and you don't need a community for that. You'll end up having to research how to get those things done. You're going to research how to make your connections to the device and things of that nature. But just being able to do things like that will help you learn.
thank you. Yeah, labbing.
Yeah, just labbing. That's where it starts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's where it starts. And most of my experience that I really got to do the network automation on devices was back with NetMiko, but I was working with dual routing engine devices that I needed a connection to both routing engines to run different checks as the configs and upgrades were progressing. So NetMiko checked that box really well versus using the vendor Pacific Python modules. So for me, NetMiko is where I did most of my work. But today I would look at the Nornir and the more modern packages that you can interact with. But bottom line, just try to do the same thing you're learning about in code, and you'll be a long way down the road.
thank you. I appreciate it.
What do you think about that, Eric? You think that's a good approach?
Yeah, no, I think it's really just solving your own problem, because inevitably we're just gonna hit, like, I'm hitting walls every day and gets frustrated and all of that. And the only way that I would get through it is you could see the reward at the end, and that reward for your job is usually very much real, alive, and helps you. So anytime that I look for challenges, the first thing I look is, am I gonna get, like, compensated in terms of, like, recognition and job performance review and all of that? Am I gonna get compensated that way first, more than just, like, satisfy my own curiosity? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Sure.
yeah, I also want to say hi to Yev, man. Good to see you here. And if you have any questions for Keith or any inputs, we're all yours. But we're actually kind of wrapping up, because we're like 4 minutes to the hour. But I just want to thank you, Keith, for being here. I want to thank Benjamin, Yev, and Barakat for showing up, especially for Barakat to ask all these insightful questions. But in particular, Keith, dude, like, thanks for being here. I really appreciate your time.
And I appreciate the invite. I try to help any way I can. And if you say this is what I need to do to help, I'll be here.
Dude, you're always a pal, man. I appreciate you. Any call to action before we wrap up?
Oh man, I would just say that everyone should never settle into where you are. Don't get comfortable. I always look for something else to learn about, understand what's kind of ebbing and flowing in the industry, even if you think it's a fad. Learn more about it, because that same characteristic that made the fad attractive could appear again. So just kind of stay curious, stay motivated to learn, and everything will be fine. That's about it.
Well said, sir. anything else from the community here? Any last minute questions? If not, we'll wrap up. I'll give like maybe 20 seconds.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for pushing out the alert on the Circle app.
Yeah, no, I think those are automated, but I'm glad that worked.